Great. Slowly inhale. Gently open your eyes. Thank you very much. We will start with the shloka number 31, which is actually the result out of which we had done last time about Mayurasana. Let us read 30th one and then go ahead. Amavashtabhya karadvena tat कूपर स्थापित नाभि पार्श्वः उच्चासनो दंड वदुदित पीतः खे मयूरमे तत् प्रवदन्ति पीठम. In the ground or placing on the ground the two palms, supporting the corresponding sides of the navel by the two elbows, raising oneself like a horizontal stick in the air. This is called as Mayurasana. And last class we were discussing how we have to be careful about raising that head itself up along with the legs and how we need to be balancing. The next shloka which gives us about the result of this regular practice of Mayurasana. Harati sakala roga nashu gulma udara adi abhibhati cha doshanasanam Shri Mayuram bahudashana bhuktam bhasma kuryad shesham janayati jatharaginim jarayet kalakutam. Now, somewhere with the literal meaning, we have to understand the metaphorical concept of these shlokas and understand how they are going to help us to regulate our body producing the toxins or the poisons within. And with the regular practice of Mayurasana, they getting treated, or you can say they getting managed. When we say Mayurasana destroys all tumors and diseases of the spleen, we have to literally understand that it is going to prevent any such kind of happening in the future in the first place. Because yoga is a preventive science, yoga should not be taken literally as a therapeutical measure. Here, the yogis, especially the Atmaram Suriji, as he is keeping it in front of us, that this asana is going to destroy the tumors and the diseases of the spleen. With the tumor or the disease of the spleen, in first place, you will not be able to do Mayurasana. Because if these are the problems which are situated in our abdomen, you will not be able to place your elbows on the respective rectus and raise your body up, which will be a very difficult part of the performance. So here we have to understand that these tumors or the diseases of the spleen will never be called for, invited because of our lifestyle in the future, as we have included Mayurasana in our daily practice. It's this Mayurasana wards of disorders of humors, Vata dosha, Kapha dosha, Pitta dosha, kindles the gastric fire, the Jatharagiri Janayati. It is going to again make sure that the gastric fire is repeatedly doing its job by getting ignited at the proper interval whenever it is required. And what is facilitating that to happen? The practice of Mayurasana. in fact, along with the other practices. Complete digests all unwholesome and overeaten food, even poison. Completely digests unwholesome and overeaten food is where understood. When it says even poison, jarayeta kalakutam, it becomes a question mark. Is it that we are going to take poison and do the practice and still remain as comfortable as we are regularly with the daily routine? No, it won't be. In fact, we have to understand with the kind of approach that we are going through this practice of Mayurasana, physical toxin, any biochemical changes taking place because of our exposure to the external environment, creating a kind of imbalance within, is also a kind of poison. And no doubt, undigested food, as we clearly know from Yoga Vasishtha, from his text, Valmiki ji, who has written that text, Yoga Vasishtha, makes us understand the process of digestion in three ways. One is ajirnatvam, indigestion. Other one is kujirnatvam. And third one is ati jirnatvam. Kujirnatvam is wrong digestion, and ati jirnatvam is over digestion, or you can say metabolism too fast and digesting very quickly. Now, all these three are the signs of imbalances, and all these three are capable of making us experience poison in our own body. So, somewhere we need to understand how Mayurasana is going to make our digestive system very strong and help us. Can we do? Can we all do Mayurasana with respect to the state of body we have, or should we observe some kind of preliminary stages to that? Yes, as we have progressed, the great teachers, contemporary teachers, have brought in front of us, instead of Mayurasana, you can do Hansasana, where you are standing on your forearms with your elbows kept at your abdominal region and not balancing, but keeping the lower body on your toes. This is like lifting only the upper body up, where the whole body is still in that kind of stick-like position, but the lower body grounded with the toes on the floor, but very lightly. This Hansasana is like a preparatory practice for the same Mayurasana. Slowly, slowly, as you develop, you can go ahead. If you are unable to do Hansasana also, then there are other postures where you can understand the strengthening of the abdomen before going for attempting either Hansasana or Mayurasana in first place. So there is always very proper gradual preparatory approach to the yogic practices. As it is told in Hatha Pradipika, we need not directly go on to practice of Mayurasana. So that is where it is very clear. Guru Padishta Margena Sada Abhishek, as been told earlier, we have to always have an approach towards these practices with the guidance of the Guru. Now we are coming to the next, which is the one which is favored and practiced very regularly by everyone, because that makes you peace induced, very relaxed. That is Shavasana. Uttanam Shavavad Bhumau Shayanam Tachavasanam. Shavasanam Shrantiharam Chit Shranti Karakam. Uttanam Shavavad Bhumau. You have to lie down on your back in that Uttana Sthiti, like a body, like a corpse. You have to make yourself totally relaxed, as if the whole body is no more active. The muscles, the joints, not only the skeletal or muscular system. Just imagine if some food particles are there in the abdomen, they may be getting digested. If something is happening in your large intestine, they may be taking place. Your heartbeats is going on regularly. Your breathing is going on regularly. The nervous system, the sensory and the motor nerves, everyone functioning to their best, because yet you are alive. But it says, the shloka says, you have to lie down like a shava. It's a very beautiful practice of withdrawing yourself from the external world to internalize and go deep within. It is like not only overcoming the physical sensation, but also overcoming the sensations of the senses, the sensation of seeing, hearing, feeling, or you can see the smell and all. It is like withdrawal. So withdrawal from the whole body, from your senses, from your mind. And when you do this kind of withdrawal, and when you come to the sukshma sharira like state of the mind, you mean in the state of shavasana itself, you will go from the conscious state to the dream state, from jagrat avastha to swapna avastha, the subconscious state. And there are chances that from the subconscious state, you may lead yourself into unconscious state. Many a times we come across this kind of feedback from our students. Sir, when you were taking the shavasana, initially for 3 to 4 minutes, I could hear your instructions and literally could experience that beautiful relaxation. But after certain period of time, I could not make out what you said later on, and I lost completely. Was it that I had gone into sleep? I said maybe or may not. Two chances that you might have literally gone into sleep. But as a teacher, I could not make out that you were into sleep. You have gone into that kind of subconscious state. But this is the result of the practice, that we literally go beyond the state of externals to the complete internalization. And that is where Shavasana gives the whole body an opportunity to settle down, to get stabilized, and even make the biochemical functioning of various systems get regulated. If your thyroid, parathyroid glands are not working properly, they get regulated. If your nervous system were somewhere getting over, worked, or they might be very sensitive, they will settle down. People who have allergic conditions, I have seen that they developed a very good resistance powers to their allergic condition as homeostasis was settling in because of shavasana, as the stress was removed. When he says here, Shranti Haram, Shranti is fatigue, and fatigue is the result which is caused out of exertion, and exertion is nothing but something which is very much closely related to stress, or we can say it is stress. Whether it is physical struggle and exertion which is leading you to the experience of fatigue, whether it is mental, or whether it is something else which is always keeping you on that level of anxiety, worried, and making you feel kya hoga, kaise hoga. Somewhere this shavasana is going to bring you down to complete settlement. That is the reason that we make people with lot of anxiety and high blood pressure or something like that do shavasana. In fact, people who are having anxiety and worry like factors there in them, they are not supposed to pranayama, the practices like they should just give themselves the guided instructions to allow that anxiety level to gradually settle down. And once the body gets adapted to that complete state of peace with that sensitivity, one can go ahead and excel in pranayama as well as in meditation. Sometimes doctors say to a person who is really excited and going through the bouts of anxiety, okay, go to the yoga teacher and learn how to practice meditation. Here, the duty of the yoga teacher becomes very clear, that he is not supposed to take that person directly into meditation, because that person is having some very well processed and conditioned thought which is keeping him involved into that anxiety. And when we'll tell that person to meditate on one point or one object, that object becomes his anxiety itself, and that anxiety level is going to go up rather than settling down. So this having made you all understood and uh, clear, it is very clear. Chitta Vishranti Karakam. Chitta, again, Maha Buddhi Ahankar, this Antahakarana faculties that we are all having, we are giving them that rest, so that that kind of identification ability comes to us between the externalization and internalization. We come to that level of understanding where we know that if we are in this state, we will never understand that peace within. We will always be existing into those pieces. We will never understand that bliss within. We will be always experiencing that blisters. So blisters is externalization and bliss is internalization. And the medium is this three, or I should say four, antahakarana, manaha buddhi ahankara, along with chitta. The chitta comprises of all these three, manaha buddhi and ahankara. And this is where it leads us from this front to that front, and we start understanding or living a different type of life. And we don't get excited, we don't get irritated, we don't get disturbed, we don't get perturbed, we don't get provoked. These are all because of this kind of practices that we go through in yoga, and one of them is shavasana. I would really like to hear from you how you have connected to this shavasana here now. Yes, Sunil bhai, you would like to add something to that?
Now, see, in the practice of Shavasana, and first of all, I mean, simple as Shavasana sounds, to that extent, it is really, really powerful.
Yes.
I find that if there is no other asana that you can do, but you simply are able to master Shavasana, I think you are halfway into the journey of yoga.
True.
Now, Sabri, there is what we had learned and had someone sometimes taught. There is what we call as partial Shavasana, and there is what we call as complete Shavasana. In partial Shavasana, we kind of relax different points, along the body, the toes and the ankles and the knees and so forth, up to the sahasrara. And then there is a complete, which is in terms of letting the entire body. Now, so how is partial just a construction of the mind? I mean, is it an artificial construction? Truly speaking, it is simply whole Shavasana. How does this work?
See, here I would like to bring in the teachings of Guruji. He went on to explain Shavasana as a Panchapadi. Are you able to hear me? Because my internet is slightly on the weaker side. Can you hear me clearly now?
I can.
Yeah. Please stop me by just raising your hand if there is any issue, so that I will be able to understand that you are not able to catch up with my words. Guruji has given us Panchapadi. Panchapadi means 5 steps for Shavasana. And in those 5 steps, the first step is lying down on your back and making sure that you have placed your body parts in such a position that you are comfortable. Because many a time, even lying down on your back, you are in that uneasiness, not able to place your leg properly, or not able to place your shoulder properly, or not able to make your head relaxed. So he is very clear that first step is to lie down and make sure that you are comfortable. And the second step is visualizing the whole body, whether it has relaxed on the floor or not. Relaxed in the sense, after lying down on the floor, visualizing from head to the toes whether there is any tension in any part of the body. And when we realize that there is more tension on one particular part and less tension on the other part, the more tensed region of the body is given an opportunity by instructions to relax. Now, those instructions are by four means. This can be just instructed, suggested. This can be just visualized or imagined. When we say instructed and suggested, this has to happen with a request, not with a command. So you are requesting your body parts because the nature is also playing its role, and it's the rule of the nature, the law of the nature, that wherever you try to force certain, whether it is even your thoughts, because thoughts are also vibrations, when you are trying to force it, it comes back. It is the Newton's third law of action, so that is, every action has a equal and opposite reaction. So you have to let the request go ahead in the form of instructions or suggestions for those body parts to relax. If they are relaxing, fine. If they are not relaxing, leave them as it is and go ahead, because you should not get stuck over there. Getting stuck that part is not doing shavasana at all. You have given suggestions, you have given instructions, you have visualized it to be relaxed. Now you should imagine that it has relaxed and move ahead to the another part. And the last part is experiencing by completely relaxing the whole body after giving instructions to each and every part, that no more the body is alive, no more the breath is taking place in the body, but with every exhalation you are experiencing as if you are leaving your body and moving out in the sense, no more breaths are taking place and the body is left in that lifeless state. Then what is the state of yours that time? It is to surrender. It is to get acquainted with that oneness into godliness. And Sir used to always give that word Maharad Anusandan. Maharad Anusandan is like a droplet in ocean. And he used to give instruction that feel that you are a droplet being dropped in the huge ocean. You, as a minor, have become one with the major. You, as an Atman, have become one with the universal Paramatman. And he used to say that from a individualized consciousness, you have now become one with universal consciousness. And many a times, to understand this, I used to ask, sir, only these instructions are enough? Only this kind of subjectivity to the instructions and feeling that you are out of it is enough? He used to say yes, because this is the thought process which will certainly lead you from the conscious state of mind to the subconscious state and maybe beyond. But this is not supposed to be given to everyone at once. Then I asked, what are the things that are supposed to be given? He said only 3 steps out of this 5. First step, make that person lie down. Second step, make that person relax his whole body. And third step, make him understand his breaths. As he inhale and exhale, let him count a particular number of breaths, and he will experience, and he will lose the counting, and he will be just with his breaths, very much relaxed. Nothing else will pull him out of that. If this is what he does as 3 step, this is like a preparation for the ultimate shavasana. And many a times in our regular class or the class for the affected people in our therapeutical classes, we end up doing only these 3 steps, and people come out with the feedback, sir, never experienced such kind of relaxation. And this is what we enjoyed. So when they give such kind of feedback, I wonder that what they are going to experience when they literally go through all the 5 steps with a proper guided, suggestions and leading them more further. And when I tried to give all the 5 steps Shavasana to a newcomer or to a therapeutic person, I came across many experiences where they literally said, okay, sir, it was fine to a certain extent, but after that we were feeling discomfort, we were feeling suffocation, we were not able to lie down. In fact, we felt like coming up and sitting. So then I realized, okay, they have not come to that level of going deep into their subconscious state, or you can say from sthula sharira to sukshma sharira. They can go up to sukshma sharira related to their breaths only, not beyond that, because their, what you can say, physical and mental state is not helping them to go beyond that. And it is good that we stop there only. So this is the reason that we should initially stick to the preparatory part, as you were suggesting, Sunil Bhai, and should not go completely for all the 5 steps that I was trying to suggest as per Guruji's instruction. And he used to say, the 5th step or the 6th step, it can be according to you whether you want to come out and add those instructions. It can become your 6th step, or if you are in that 5th step continuously, there are chances that you may start getting into the processes of meditation also. So doing meditation in Shavasana, I said, sir, is it not that people will go into sleep? He said, no. But aren't we supposed to do meditation sitting? Yes. We are supposed to do meditation in sitting position. But this is how you are preparing yourself for that. Because unless and until you train your mind to relax and settle down and become stabilized, you cannot train it in the sitting position. So first make sure that this is happening, then that will happen. And I said, how long it will take? For you, it may take few years. And if I say how many years, then it may be 10 to 15 years. But for people who do not understand philosophy, they may take some more janma, and then they will realize the proper practice of Shavasana. Otherwise, they will come out and tell you, I am feeling suffocated. I am not feeling comfortable. I am not used to this kind of relaxation. And you said that we should not. So trying to make myself keep awake is also an exercise for me over there. So then you should understand that that person is not yet ready for the further progress. So this is how the things were getting materialized in Shavasana also for all of us. So how important is Shavasana? You can make out from that. Yes.
Bhupendra sir, you were asking something?
I'm mute.
After you.
Okay.
After you.
That also brings me to another point which has been on my mind now for ever since the time I first started yoga. So, what is the difference between concentration and relaxation? Is it the same? And just as this one, is it the same as the difference between dharana and dhyana?
I would put it like this. When we say relaxation in action is Shavasana, and action in relaxation is concentration. When you are totally relaxed, with your body as well as your mind, and then when you allow your mind to get focused, you are established in relaxation and you are going further ahead. And that is where the concentration happens. Otherwise, we are always distracted. Na? There are many more things to let ourselves get distracted from our sense perceptions by all means. So when in action, if you are becoming stabilized and coming to relaxation, yes, it is relaxation. But when you are going into an action in relaxation, it should become concentration. And profound action in that concentration, which is in relaxation, will take you into meditation. And meditation will happen. It cannot be done. Concentration is in your hand. Meditation is not at all in our hand. It has to happen. So that's how I would explain your query, sir.
So to that extent, all of relaxation is something that just happens by itself, right? It's not something that you can do. As a matter of fact, you can't go to sleep. When you cease doing things, you automatically fall off to sleep.
In fact, Guruji once said, that sleep is also a natural concentration where you allow your whole body to relax, and the GABA neuron is affecting your nervous system to such a great extent that your mind becomes focused on that sleep and you become unconscious in that sleep and you are in that. But when you are concentrating on any other object to make that concentration happen, you are in that wakeful condition where you keep on focusing on it and you are with that. And once you have trained yourself into that wakeful concentration, you will find that your sleeping patterns have reduced, sleeping duration have reduced, and with less sleep itself, you will feel as if you are satiated and you won't require more periods like 6 hours to 8 hours of sleep to make yourself healthy. That is the beauty of concentration, that concentration can be made. So that is the reason now most of the times we have said, okay, if you are having that good sleep, you will be able to focus more. हम बच्चों को भी बोलते हैं कि तुम्हारी नींद पूरी नहीं हुई है, इसलिए तुम इतने डिस्टर्ब्ड हो, पहले सो जाओ, नींद को पूरी कर लो, और then you will be able to focus and concentrate. Now that is well understood there. So look at sleep. In Guruji's words, he used to say that is also a kind of concentration only, but that concentrated effort is unconscious, whereas the other concentration efforts are totally conscious ones. This is how he used to place it. And he went on to say, Patanjali ji, when he says, abhav pratyaya alambana vrittir nidra, then you have to understand that nidra as the absence of the experience or absence of the pratyaya. That absence of pratyaya means you are not experiencing anything. It is a deep conscious sleep, and you are not conscious about anything else, but you are more conscious in the sleep. You have gone into that state. So he used to connect that consciousness with that, because some person asked him the question, when you say samadhi is like this, so is sleep also samadhi? So he wanted to make us understand that when you talk about samadhi, you go into that state only when remaining aware and conscious. But when you go into sleep, you become unconscious. You are not conscious about anything. You are not experiencing anything. But here the experience goes on from one thing to the other, from the other to the third, from the third to the fourth. And ultimately you start experiencing something which is beyond the other experiences and which you cannot fathom. And that is where you are into that sattvic state, which leads you further ahead. So that is how you are growing and going beyond. But here in the sleep, you become totally unconscious of everything happening around you, and you lose what happened. In fact, when you come out of sleep, you do say, I had a nice sleep. Now I'm feeling fresh. That nice sleep without any disturbance, which gives you a feeling of freshness, is like giving you a break from the routine work and making you ready to go ahead for the next part. Whereas when you have a disturbed sleep, you have a headache in the morning and you say, I have a very bad sleep last night, and this is the reason that I'm not comfortable. So the other part of the day also gets disturbed. So understand how sleep as a break from the routine is essential. Now that break, Guruji used to say, that break is not essential for the path of self-realization, but that break is very much essential in your karmic, going through the state of, prarabdha and sanchita karma that you have accumulated and experiencing them. In that state, you need that break. Otherwise, you will break. That's how he used to say and explain us. So all these things are there, and only thing is that as we were understanding that story from Bhagavad Gita, and madam told ki more than understanding these stories and relating it to our students, it is that we start applying to it, and when we start applying to it, we will experience it for ourselves, and the need for making it for others will become less important than it will become for us. और ये अगर ये हमारा प्रारब्ध है कि हम शिक्षक बने और सबको सिखाएं, तो ये बात और है, क्योंकि ये भी हमारे कर्मों का एक फल है. And if you do it without any connectivity with that and keep on doing it and leaving it as it is, then you are doing justice to it. Otherwise, we all have some expectation out of that, and that expectation leads to the things which Ashutosh sir was telling us, the two examples which he gave about the workers, the one who is doing his duty because he needs to do it, and the others because that is also important, because unless and until we get a proper wage or the healthy thing to sustain ourselves, how we are going to excel and do everything proper. So both things are coming here also, and we need to understand them going deeper into that. So said and done. I would like to hear it from you now, Ashutosh sir.
I had two questions. Two questions. One was, as you have rightly said, it is not easy to relax.
Yeah.
It is very difficult to relax.
Very difficult.
And I have also experienced it, because when I lie down and try to keep my hands to the side, hands automatically come and lock themselves like this. They want to hold each other. So that gives rise to the question that the mind is so used to tension. So is the tension the natural state of the mind?
We have made it natural, and initially I would suggest that you keep your hands like this or like this and try to relax. When your relaxation is becoming more profound, there will be a time that you will feel the hands are getting separated and you will become like this.
Okay.
You have to give yourself time for that.
Okay.
Because if a person says, let me become a yogi at this point of time, let me leave my home, my kids, my all possessions, and go to Himalaya and start concentrating, there are many things which are going to come into his mind, telling him about his kids, his family, and about his possessions, where he will not be able to. In the very similar manner, Shavasana, if you suddenly force relaxation upon yourself, it won't happen. In fact, you have to listen to the body and cater to its need. If it says that I want to move certain part of the body, please do it. If it says stretch something, please do it. If it says interlock the fingers and relax, please do that. If it says keep the hand behind the head and relax, please do that. And until you start making the body understand, yes, I am listening to you, but you have to relax. And if the time comes where there is nothing involved, no involvement is there, you just close your eyes and you're relaxed in any state. You are relaxed in the state of standing on one toe. A day will come for that. That is where we get control on everything and we become very much stabilized in that position. So this is how you have to take it, sir.
Okay. The second question is, no, thank you. This is very useful. Second question is, in the daily practice, where do you place Shavasana? In the beginning, in the end, or in the middle? Or you can place it anywhere?
I would suggest you can. Yes, sir. Have you completed?
Or is the place variable? That means on some days you keep it in the beginning, some days at the end. Where do you place it?
See, all the answers are there in your question only. When I say, okay, when you are supposed to practice, and when you said in the beginning, in the end, or in the middle, how do you feel when to practice it? If I feel I'm slightly disoriented, and if I want to become more focused in my practice, let me do Shavasana first. If I feel, yes, I am motivated, I am very much involved in my actions, so let me go through Sukshma Vyayama, Surya Namaskar if possible, let me go through Asana, and then let me relax. But if I find after doing Namaskar, my breathing was not proper, haphazard, and in this haphazard way of breathing, should I go ahead and do asanas? No. Then what you should do? Do Shavasana first. Let the come to that normalcy. If everything becomes pacified, then sit up, then stand up, or in that lying down position, go ahead with all the asanas that you want to do, and ultimately do Shavasana again. In fact, when I started, I should share this with you. I was going through hypertension at the age of 29, 30 itself. I was experiencing high blood pressure. And my teacher, whenever I entered into the class and when I used to sit, he used to first hold my wrist and check with my nadi. And he used to say, Sabir bhai, please lie on your back and relax. I used to say, I just came in and you want me to relax? Yes, I want to relax. And he used to give me a Shavasana instruction with touch method. And his touch method was his 4 fingers or his palm kept on my feet, kept on my hands, kept on my tummy, kept on my chest, kept on my forehead, making me realize that this is the reason that I have to relax and tell myself. So whenever he used to keep those hands on my body parts, I used to feel, yes, I'm relaxing. And later on, he went on to say, imagine I am keeping my hand on your feet and your feet are getting relaxed. Imagine I'm keeping my hand on your hands and you are getting relaxed. Imagine I'm keeping my hand on your forehead and you are getting relaxed. It became so conditioned. Whenever I used to feel tensed and excited or anxiety used to go up, even in sitting position in my office chair, I used to feel Kulkarni sir is keeping his hand on my forehead and I am relaxing. And that itself is to induce lot of relaxation. So slowly, we have to come to this understanding that when yogic practices are to be done, they are supposed to be done in a state of mind and body where you are relaxed. Because then only you will go ahead. Otherwise, you will get stuck there and you will not progress. And that is the importance of Shavasana. You can either practice it in the beginning, you can either practice it in the middle, or ideally, you should always practice it at the last. Usually, Shavasana is taken in any yoga session at the last because it is a group session. But when it comes to the individualized understanding, we have to understand that person with his personality, the sattvic nature, the tamasic nature, or the rajasic nature. And if that person is of rajasic nature, it is very important that he relaxes first and then goes ahead. And if that person is of rajasic nature, he is made to do 2 rounds of the building and then come and take an entry into the class and then sit down and make himself ready for yoga sessions. So that is how you have to have an approach towards this whole science of yoga. Yes, sir. I hope I have given that understanding to you. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah, Sunil bhai.
Yeah, I believe and that Guruji B.K. Iyengar's path to international fame actually led through Shavasana or such a relaxation practice. He was introduced to Yehudi Menuhin, the violinist, and he was granted just 5 minutes. He said, I'm busy and I'm tired, could not get enough sleep last night, let's say whatever. So just 5 minutes. And in those 5 minutes, he, like Sabir bhai mentioned about, putting the hand on the feet, etc. So I don't know what Guruji Iyengar Sahib did, but the Menuhin went into deep sleep of almost an hour or so. And when he woke up, he was immediately interested. Oh my God, if this yoga has the power to help you relax, I want to know more. And then that became a very defining kind of relationship. And through him, the path opened to the West. So
Great.
That really is the power of Shavasana.
So how the practical approach towards yoga has to be understood. And many times, I should say, out of 100, 90 times it is misunderstood and only 10 times it is properly understood. And we have to hammer it many a times on the students' head. Okay, this is how you have to take it yoga and not the way you are trying to have an approach towards it. So with this all understanding, let us go ahead to the next shloka. Chaturtya asanani Shivena katitani vai tebhya chatushkamadaya sarabhutam pravimyaham. Now here Chaturshitya, he is making us understand that there are 84 asanas which have been enumerated by Lord Shiva. And I am describing the 4 most important of them. When he says Chaturshiti or 84, Gherana Samhita says Asanani samastani jivantavaha. As many species, organisms are existing in this world, that many asanas are there. And he goes on to says 84 lakhs in words. And when he says 84 lakhs asanas are there, he says out of that 84 lakhs, 16 less to 100. These are the words of the verses which I'm literally pronouncing in English. He says 16 less to 100 are the important ones. Now 16 less to 100 are important means 84. Those are the answers. Out of those 84, I am describing 32 out of them. So he explains 32, but he doesn't give us the description of the 4 important ones. And Swatmaram Suriji here is very particular and very specific, making us understand that out of those 84, these 4 are important. Literally, the earlier 11 which he has already mentioned, they are also belonging to this 84 only. And he doesn't say whether they are important or not. But we have to understand that the earlier 11 are going to prepare us for this 4. The objective of this 4 will be achieved only and only if we have understood the previous ones and we have exposed ourselves with regular practice to them. So when he talks about this 4, he says the 4 important are Siddham Padmam Tatha Sinham Bhadram Cha Iti Chatustayam Shresam Tatra Api Sukhe Tishthet Siddhasane Sada. Siddhasan, Padmasan, Simhasan, Bhadraasan are the 4 which are best among all the 84 asanas. And out of this 4, he says, Shresham Tatra Api. Out of this 4 also there is one which is very special, and that one is Siddhasan, in which one should always stay comfortably. As he says that, he goes on to give us the description of the beautiful practice Siddhasan. If we come to the shlok number 35, here he says, Tatra Siddhasanam Yisthanakam Ankha Grimula Ghatitam Krutva Dridam Vinyaset Padam Ekameva Hrye Krutva Hanum Susthiram Sthanuhu Sanyama Iti Indriyo Achala Drisha Pashed Bhruvor Antaram Yet Okshaka Kapat Bhed Janakam Siddhasanam Prauchyate. Now he has defined the whole Siddhasan in these 4 lines where he says placing one heel firmly against the perineum. Yoni Sthanakam Ankhagri Moola Ghatitam. You have to keep the heel of one heel at the perineal region, that is the region between the anus and the genitals, or I should say below the scrotum and above the anus is the perineal region. And there he says we should press the heel or hold it firmly there. Fix the other foot above the penis, above your genital. Now one is below the scrotum and the other one is above the genital. The chin being firmly fixed on the chest. This is the second step. The first step was placement of the heels. Second step is the placement of the chin on the chest. One should remain motionless. That means get organized and become steady in that. And then he says, with senses under control and the eyes steady, with all the five indriya brought or in or withdrawn in, one should go ahead and bring our eyes in between the two eyebrows, and keeping the eyes steady, look between the two eyebrows, that is Bhru Madhya. Now this is called Siddhasana, which forces open the door to salvation. It says Mokshaka, Moksha Kapata Bheda Janakam. It is going to take you to that path where you will be able to break open the obstacle and go beyond it and lead yourself towards moksha. Now, here we need to understand, because in the next 6 to 7, he has almost explained 9 shlokas, devoted 9 shlokas for this particular Siddhasana. But here we need to understand, okay, is it possible for us to keep both the heels at the perineal region and above the genital? Have we made our thighs that flexible or the knees that flexible so that we can fold them and keep them at that position? Have we brought our senses under that control with the earlier practices? Maybe sadhak tattva, bhadak tattva, maybe related to other things like, remaining away from the hassles of the worldliness and getting into that isolation of the practice, getting that kind of place where you are not disturbed by anything and you are able to focus. And once you are in that state, you will be able to go ahead with Siddhasana. But the question is, are we? If not, and if the body is flexible and you are able to place your heels as he is suggesting, believe me, moksha is very far away. Because all the things we are catching you up and getting you involved into your karmas, into your prarabdha, and creating more karmas, adding the baggage with more sanchita karma. This addition is going on throughout our life without our realization many a times. And here, Siddhasana goal and objective will not be reached. To understand this fact, we will go ahead to the next. He says, Matantaretu, there is another way of performing this practice of Siddhasana. What is the another way? Medhrad upari vinyasya savyam gulfam tatha upari gulfantaram cha nikshipya Siddhasanam idam bhavet. Now here the technique is slightly different. Both the heels are said to be kept above the genitals. Another opinion says fixing the left ankle above the penis and other ankle over that. That means the right ankle is supposed to be placed on the left one. Again, this is more challenging. It is more challenging than to the previous one. How come both the heels can be placed pressing from the top as if they are placed on the pubic bone and they are pressing the penis region or the pelvic region from the top? He says, Paschad Uktam Anya Siddham Matam Purvam Matsendra Matam. Purvam Eva Matsendra Matam. The first one is the opinion of Matsendranath. That means the one to keep the heel at the perineal region, and the above one is the technique explained by Matsendraji. Now, where did he learn about Matsendranath's technique? That means Matsendranath also has written some scripts, some grantha in which he has specified how to practice Siddhasana very clearly. So this clearly comes to us because we have understood that Goraksha Shataka is there where the description of Matsendra Asana is there. Where is not Matsendra Asana, Siddhasana is there. But where is Matsendra's work? And if you go deeper into it, I'm not recollecting the names, but I have come across there are 6 texts written by Matsyendranath himself, and maybe Swatmaramji might have gone through them, and that's why he says that the first variation is by Matsyendranath ji, and the second is said to be that of the other Siddhas. Why the other Siddhas came into the experiencing of keeping both the heels above the penis region or above the genitals? Why this technique was that way? Now, he doesn't say anything or gives us reason about it. Why? Because it is a matter of practice and getting into the realization of the results, not just to make it worldly, and we will be satisfied with those explanation in the words itself. So the understanding here we need to know is get into the practice, go to that level, and try to experience the changes which will make you understand that doing blah 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 on hatha yoga is something else, and going internalized on the subject of hatha yoga is something else. That's what it says initially, na Hatha Vidya Param Gopyam Siddhi Michitam Bhaved Viryavati Nirviryatu Prakashita. So here Swami Swatmaramji is also observing a kind of that regulation or rule where he is not explaining each and everything for us to take it as it is, but he says experience it, go through it. And this experiencing is being very clear when he talks about shlok number 37, where he gives three more names to this practice. Etat siddhasanam prahur anye vajrasanam viduhu muktasanam vadantyeke prahur guptasanam pare. Now here Vajras, Muktasan and Guptasan, these three more names are said to be the other names of Siddhasan. If you go through Gheranda Samhita, as we will be going through later on, but let me tell you here, Gheranda Samhita talks about Siddhasan as the first asana, gives one technique, and for Vajrasan, different technique. For Muktasan, another different technique. Then he talks about Guptasan. There also he is giving another technique. So all the four techniques are different. In Guptasan, he says, let both the ankles be crossed and you are sitting on it in such a manner that the ankles are pressing the anus region from the sides below your scrotum. And that is Guptasan, where the ankles are kept Gupta. Whereas the same Guptasan, if you study in Goraksha Shataka, you will find that the genitals have been covered with the ankles kept one above the other, which is been here as Siddhasan, but Goraksha Shataka gives that name of Guptasan. Now, whether it is Gupta or whether it is Siddha, the practice is going to lead to Siddhi, and that Siddhi is success in yoga. And that success in yoga is to be understood in the next shlokas as he goes on to make it very clearer and makes us understand the importance. But here, another practice, Muktasan. If you see the technique of Muktasan, Gheranda Samhita, it is very simple to that of sitting in Padmasan. The right leg on the left thigh, the left leg on the right thigh. The difference in Padmasan and Muktasan is, in Padmasan, your heel should come very close to each other, touching the pubic bone. But in Muktasan, the heels are away from the pubic bone. They are on the thighs, maybe closer to the knees, but not nearer to the this thing. What do you say? As your abdominal region or pubic bone region. And when you talk about Vajrasan, Vajra Asan, literally the legs are folded and kept behind, and you're sitting on that position, as you all know, according to Gheranda. But here, Swamiji, the great Swatmaram Suriji, is telling us that whether it is Vajrasan, whether it is Muktas, are doing nothing else but carrying out the same activity of Siddhasan with respect to its approach, goal, and aim. With this said and done and understood, if you see the next shloka, it says, Yamesh viva mitahar ahimsa niyamesh viva mukhyam sarva ane vesh sarva ashinish vekam siddhaha siddhasanam viduhu. What does this mean? Mitahar, that is moderate diet, is the foremost among the yamas. That means the most important yama is mitahar. And the next sentence, ahimsa be the most niyamas. Whereas in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, we see ahimsa as the first yama. But here, ahimsa is counted in niyama, and mitahar is taken as the most important or the foremost of the yamas. With this understanding, as he goes ahead, asana called siddhasana by the siddhas is the most important among the asanas. Now he is giving us the reason also why siddhasana is the most important one among the others. Before going ahead and understanding among those 84 asanas why siddhasana is more important and how it purifies the 72,000 nadis, let us try to have a small clarification among ourselves with this 35, 36, 37, 38 shloka. With all these 4 shlokas there, as I have gone through it and made you understand, is there anything there in your mind which you would like to clarify or just add on to it? And this 38th shloka is also an indication that yamas and niyamas are to be taken as a literal practice of day-to-day living. In fact, that should become the part and practice of every individual. And maybe that is the reason that in Jainism, if you see Anuvrata and Mahavrata, Anuvrata is supposed to be practiced by general public, and Mahavrata is to be practiced by the Munis. Now, even Patanjali goes ahead and says that these yamas are to be taken very seriously, and they are supposed to be practiced as Mahavrata. Highest vow. When we say highest vow or taking a pledge to observe it, how it is important for us. Has just added it to a little in the side that time was practicing yamas and niyamas to the highest level, and then they were coming to the progressive path of yoga, where they were embarking on this step-by-step asan, kumbhaka, mudra, and nadanusandhan, as suggested by the Hatha Pradipika here. So this is how we need to understand the mentioning of the yamas and niyamas in this 38th shloka. Yes, friends. Ashutosh sir, what is your inclination towards this?
As I find it very interesting that you mentioned that Atmaramji does not say which one you have to follow. He says there are 3 variants. There are 3 different ways of performing Siddhasana. But then he says what is important is Mitahar and Ahimsa, and then Siddhasana. And you can perform Siddhasana in any one of the 3 ways. That's what he's saying. Is that what he's saying?
That is what he's saying, and in fact, he is making us understand you can literally take these 3 names for Siddhasana itself. Because as I told you, the second variant technique in Gheranda Samhita, it is given as Muktasana, not Muktasana, sorry, Guptasana. So when the technique is given like that, how should we understand here? So here in other text, as I told you in Goraksha Shataka, if you see the technique of Guptasana, it is the second variant given here. But here he says, okay, I am telling you the 2 techniques. And the first technique is by Matsyendranath ji, and the second technique is what he just doesn't mention anything and says in the next shloka that you can call Siddhasana as Vajrasana, you can call Siddhasana as Muktasana or Guptasana also, because this is considered to be Siddhasana only, because they may be also leading to the same kind of experience as you are getting in the Siddhasana. There are various options open for all of us. Okay, how to take it and understand. That means the practice is more important, and the technique, whichever you have learned from your teacher as per your ability and capacity, that matters more. Otherwise, what people say, oh my God, I cannot practice Siddhasana. So maybe moksha is not for me in this janma. I will wait for next janma where I will be able to perform Siddhasana as said by Swatmaramji, and then I will gain moksha. This is a simple excuse for not going ahead. Rather, he makes us understand that whatever you call and whatever you are being taught as per your teacher, you should practice it and go ahead. And you should take it that way.
Right.
This is how we need to understand. And Sunil bhai, you want to add something?
All I want to say is there's a quote attributed to Deng Xiaoping that it doesn't matter whether the cat is black or white, so long as it catches mice.
Beautifully said.
So,
Very true.
regardless of the name, you should be able to derive the benefit. And then you can call it.
और दुख की बात मैं आपको बता रहा हूं. I have seen this happening in the conference. People doing debate on the technique of Siddhasana and giving various references. And I stood up and told them what difference it makes with what technique you are getting. What is that ultimate thing that you are gaining? That is supposed to be the same. It is the only one thing that we are achieving at last. Then why we are debating on which is the right technique and which is not the right technique, and what who said, and what is more powerful, and what is going to give you the result faster, or what is going to give you result slower? In fact, who is the person who should do, or what type of technique? Rather than getting into all those ruckus, we are again coming into materialistic aspects of yoga itself. Let us go into that metaphysical understanding of the subject, not get into this kind of technical aspect. So though yoga is technical, it is based on the metaphysical aspects of Sankhya only. And that is the more important aspect of Hatha Yoga, which leads us into Raja Yoga. And Raja Yoga is nothing else than the Patanjali's yoga. And Patanjali Yoga is completely based on Sankhya philosophy. So here this understanding of Swatmaramji telling us that Hatha Yoga is meant for Raja Yoga only, Raja Yoga only. People forget that Raja Yoga aspect and get into Hatha, telling that it is the practice which is practiced with force. And that is where we go very badly wrong. It becomes very important for all of us to understand these things. 5 minutes more there. Should we take the another shloka? Or stop here to discuss? Yes, Ashutosh sir, tell me.
From this discussion, I am reminded of what I think you had said in the beginning, or maybe Sunil bhai had said in the beginning, that yoga is not to be approached from our everyday kind of thinking, materialistic thinking. So, would it be right to say that yoga is not meant for everyone who comes with that materialistic thinking?
Not at all. I will go on to say that yoga is not at all meant for materialistic achievements. Rather, I would say that when you are coming to yoga, your materialistic things become easier for you to have. At the same time, you develop a kind of state of mind which leads you into the other side of the life, that is the spiritual side. And sir, one more thing, as we are parallelly understanding Bhagavad Gita also, and as today in the morning we were having such a great discussion, as a person we may be having, according to our Sanchita Karma Prarabdha, our duties assigned to us because of that. In fact, because of regular practice of yoga or our approach and understanding of yoga, this Sanchit Karma converted into Prarabdha is getting into a easier mode of flow, and we are not becoming attached to it. We are not becoming more concerned with what I am getting. Rather, we are getting more concerned how much I am getting more and more relieved or spent up. and become more and more connected to that aspect of life where I need to really get into. So this is how yoga can be connected to Bhagavad Gita's theoretical understanding of Vedanta and the practical side of yoga here. Yes, sir. Thank you. Sunil Bhai. You are mute, sir.
No, we can go on. You wish we have 3 minutes. You want to take up another shloka or not?
Yes. I will take up another shloka, the 39th one, because it is a simple understanding where he says, Chaturshiti Pitheshu Siddhameva Sada Abhyaset Dvasapta Sahastranam Nadinam Malashodanam. Of the 84 asanas, only Siddhasan, which purifies the 72,000 nadis, should be practiced daily. Should be practiced daily means if you are practicing Siddhasan, there is no need to focus upon the other asanas. Another way of understanding is if you have gained the ability of practicing Siddhasan with its right understanding, then please understand this Siddhasan itself is more than enough to purify your 72,000 nadis. Here we get the number of nadis which are present in our body also, and at the same time it says that is the reason that this Siddhasan is the only asana which will take us to that success of purifying the nadis, and it should be done daily, regularly. And if you see the next shloka, Atmadhyayi mitahari yavat dwadasha vatsaram sada siddhasanam abhyasad yogi nishpattim apnuyat kimanyai